The PlayStation era of Final Fantasy was the golden age of the series. Final Fantasy is one of the most beloved RPG series of video games. Its fan base is global and its influence on the gaming world cannot be overstated. For any long-running series like this, there will always be ups and downs. Fortunately for Final Fantasy, especially when it comes to the mainland titles 1 through 15, there really isn't too many of these. But back to my argument, though the series quality has stayed relatively high, there is no better era of games than what came out between 1997 and 2000. This includes Final Fantasy 7, 8, Tactics, and 9. The NES and SNES era produced only a single game that I would call timeless. Final Fantasy VI has withstood the test of time and continues to be one of the best video games ever created. Final Fantasy VI is a high note for the series and a beloved entry overall. 2001 forward was a time of learning for the series. Final Fantasy X is obviously an amazing title and a standout for Final Fantasy as a whole. Of everything that came out during this time, 10 was the least experimental, but even it stepped far outside the boundaries the series had created for itself in the past. Dropping the ATB system, adding voice acting, party member swaps, the grid system, and hyperlinearity were just a few of the examples. Final Fantasy XI became the series' first MMO, and was well received, though it's disappointing to have a main series title that's practically unplayable now due to it being just that, an MMO. Final Fantasy XII was the beginning of what I call the chaotic mess of Square Enix. If you look into its development, there were a lot of problems behind the scenes that led to an altered and unfocused game. We wouldn't get the true form of this game until Zodiac Age, but even if we had gotten this back in 2006, its flaws would still be obvious. And thus starts what I would call the worst generation of games. Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels, the original release of Final Fantasy XIV, and the absolute nut punch that was Final Fantasy XV show that Square Enix truly did not have a firm understanding of the series' reality and where it would be going from here. Luckily, in the last few years, we've seen a new focus. Final Fantasy XIV's second release has produced one of the most lucrative games in the series, and the remake of Final Fantasy VII managed to avoid any fan base breaking controversies and took what the company learned from these games to create what I would say is their best modern day Final Fantasy to date. But that's not why we're here today. Why is the PS1 era the golden age? The graphics and hardware are by no means timeless, but what matters is there. Direction, passion, focus, and love for the series would forge four of the best games in history's catalog and a legendary era for gaming as a whole. It's no wonder that Nobuo Uematsu, who had composed nearly all the music for the series up to this point, stepped away after 9. He burned himself out, as did many others at Square, creating the best the company had to offer. I'm going to walk through each one of these titles individually and give you my arguments for why they have created the best generation. How do you go about introducing Final Fantasy VII? The first point to bring up is Final Fantasy VII's continued historical and cultural significance in gaming. But simply being popular doesn't make you a good game. What makes Final Fantasy VII great is a hard point to make because it's really hard to put your finger on it. 7 feels different than anything I've ever seen, and yet almost every JRPG out there mirrors it. A spiky-haired hero with a laughably large sword? Check. Love triangle? Check. Massive boobs on a female lead? Check. Cold, femmy, long-haired villain wielding a samurai sword? Check. Look, I'm not claiming that Final Fantasy VII was the progenitor of these staples, but it's important to note that present-day criticism doesn't seem to take into account that Final Fantasy VII wasn't trying to be anything but itself. The world, characters, and situations just bleed originality in every breath. Not by today's standards, but as a kid, I and many others hadn't seen anything like it. Most of this comes down to those exact points: the cast, the story, the settings. Take as an example the two female leads. As generic as the sporty childhood friend with a secret crush for the hero and the perky, strong-willed flower girl may be, Tifa and Aerith both blaze their own trail. Tifa's design alone has always fascinated me. Her color scheme is bland compared to the likes of Cloud's deep purples, Aerith's pastel pinks, and Vincent's emo reds. The one feature that stands out to everyone and their dog is her shape. But instead of making her some kind of overly sexualized character like we've seen very often, it was subtle enough that it produced instead the image of a strong and capable fighter. The deep emotional struggle she has through the story is punctuated by the fact that at the end of the day, she may not get what she wants, which is for her and Cloud to be happy together. It only stands to accentuate this point when you realize that that outcome is completely up to the player's discretion. Aerith is, well, she's a masterpiece of tragedy. Whether you fall into the Tifa fanbase or the Aerith fanbase, no one can deny the strength of her character and the role she plays in the overarching story. Though her ending is not defined by the character's choice necessarily, her influence sticks with you far after the credits roll. Now I want to talk about the Buster Sword and the character attached to it. How did this come to being? Seriously, I think that the Buster Sword sums up the appeal of this game. Why is the sword so big? This looks futuristic. Why would someone still use a sword? What are these two holes for? Of course, the lore of the story can answer those questions, but someone standing on the outside looking in can't help but be intrigued by the sheer unknown this sword and game bring to mind. Cloud is another great example of why 7 is so interesting. Yes, again, we've seen this play out so many times. Spiky-haired hero with a big sword is sought after by multiple beautiful women. His past life as a soldier mercenary has made him hardened and indifferent to the world's problems, but alas, fate forces him to take up his sword and save the world from destruction. Now with that being said, let's remember that this was not the cliche it is today. Final Fantasy VII wasn't trying to be anything but Final Fantasy VII. Games like Arcrise Fantasia, Thousand Arms, Code Vein, and many others simply pay homage to what it set up. The gameplay of Final Fantasy VII wasn't as big a departure as we've seen in the past, but its complete 180 from the standard job system prevalent in every game in the series previously is its biggest standout feature. Stats, equipment, limit breaks, and weapon range are really the only thing that differentiate each character. Everything else is completely customizable through the Materia system. Though it does boast a customizable appeal, players quickly realize the best way to build out your team for optimal use. I found Final Fantasy XII's original license system worked like this as well. Sure, you have all these options, or you can give all your characters katanas and watch them decimate everything in their way. But this really isn't a huge problem. I love what they built with the Materia system, and making each character take on whatever role you wanted was miles ahead of any RPG at the time. I'm going to quickly mention the settings. Midgar is iconic in its depressing industrial glory. The world becomes a whole lot less cohesive once you escape the Mako City, but they always seem to fit the feel of the story being told. The Gold Saucer, Cosmo Canyon, Rocket Town, and Wutai don't always strike me as existing in the same world, but they all feel universally like Final Fantasy VII in some way. It's hard to explain. A lot of praise is heaped on Final Fantasy VI for defining not just the Final Fantasy series, but the RPG genre. 6 is great. It's a masterpiece, but I'd argue that the footprint left by 7 is much larger than 6. Because of this, I argue that Final Fantasy VII kicked off the golden age of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VIII followed up the monstrous success of Final Fantasy VII, and the rush to capitalize on the surge of new players is seen in its design. 8 is the weakest game of this generation. That doesn't make it a bad game, but it suffers from glaring design flaws, which is evident when you consider developer-intended playstyle. Games are played in two fundamental ways: the dev-intended way or the unintended way. Let's take Mario 64 as an example of this. The dev-intended way is horrible. This game's controls and level structure have not aged well in the least. Playing this game now as intended is an exercise in patience, persistence, and repetitive action. But if you play the game like this, look, no one goes to Twitch to watch someone run through TikTok clock for the 10th time. They go to see the game played in the unintended way. Final Fantasy VIII does something similar. The dev-intended way of playing, with its focus on summons and drawing magic, really isn't very exciting. In fact, if you play the game the dev-intended way, I'll wager you'll probably run into a fan who will tell you you're playing it wrong. Again, I don't think 8 is a bad game, but its appeal is focused on a certain group of people who find joy in breaking systems and finding loopholes in a game that was porous to begin with. I think the problems with 8 extend also to its character design. Look at Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII. This design is what I would call timeless. Now look at Rydia from Final Fantasy IV, or how about Tidus from 10? All of these designs were created with no particular fad or pop culture of the time. Now look at Rinoa. You remember the late 90s, early 2000s when all the girls looked like this? Oh, and here's Quistis. These designs are some of the worst in the series. It feels old, dated. It's like watching the new guy today and realizing that this was cool. But enough about all that. What did Final Fantasy VIII do right? This. The overall story was a mess, but the individual scenarios were amazing. You start with a sweeping opening that hits you with an epic operatic musical piece and shifts scenes of beauty and chaos. You have this moment where Squall is approaching a battlefield or running from a giant mechanical spider. You have one of the iconic dance scenes, which is one of the few moments where Rinoa and Squall's deeper personality traits are allowed to shine. You have this amazing moment in space. Yes, you heard me, space. Look, I don't find playing Final Fantasy VIII incredibly enjoyable. It's not amazing, it's not bad, it just kind of exists in the middle. But I do love experiencing it. I remember the scenarios more than I remember any of the characters. I also remember the sheer unease of the story and the unknown that is constantly present throughout. I don't want to use too many examples, but there's this prevailing theory that Squall dies in this scene where he is impaled by ice spears. He's in the middle of a mission and goes to fight the sorceress and bam! Then he wakes up and just kind of keeps moving through the story, ignoring the fact that he was mortally wounded. But from this point on, everything just gets weird. Supernatural events and increasingly confusing encounters with Ultimecia's different incarnations lead to an absolutely bizarre ending, where Squall is wandering around a wasteland before you are finally presented with this image. Then the game ends, and you see everyone celebrating, and the image ends with an ambiguous meeting of Squall and Rinoa. This to me is what makes this game memorable. The story is so vague and unknown that players will probably theorize about it forever. There are no answers here, just mystery and speculation. Final Fantasy Tactics was an experiment that must have just hit at the right time. This was not the first Tactics RPG, but with how many people talk about it, it might as well be. There are real people out there that believe that no Tactics game has ever been able to beat the sheer genius of Final Fantasy Tactics, including my brother. I love you, Chapel. Look, I don't know if this is the epitome of Tactics RPGs. I mean, Fire Emblem Awakening, Valkyrie Chronicles, and the Disgaea franchise are pretty great, and in my opinion have built on this formula. But I'll tell you what Tactics does better than all of them: building a legacy. You know how they say that restrictions force a creator to innovate? Take, for example, the soundtrack of Chrono Trigger. Yasunori Mitsuda took the restrictions of SNES and made an absolutely untouchable OST. Arguably, the best part of Chrono Trigger is its music. Final Fantasy Tactics benefited from the constraints of the PS1. It built complex systems, but not too complex. It gave the players choices, but not too many choices. I mean, even the graphics evoke a whimsical memorial of days gone by. Now, I don't remember too much of the story. It was weird and hard to follow, but I will say this: it had a political weight to it, unlike any game I've ever played. Despite the wide world being this pixelated map with some grids representing the different areas, it felt huge and impactful and cold. As a player, you truly felt the insignificance of your tiny army and its lofty goals. And that bittersweet ending, again, another one that leaves you theorizing as to its true meaning. Did Delita deserve to die? Is Ramza and his sister dead? I'm not sure. As far as the gameplay goes, it's slow. I think of all 4 of these titles, this game has aged the poorest. Final Fantasy VII doesn't look too hot when you put it under a microscope, but at least it's fairly simple to understand. Tactics is not new player friendly. It throws you into the gameplay with little direction and simply presents your options up front. Veteran players love this style because it allows them to jump in fast and quick, creating their ideal builds right away. But a new player is going to be constantly punished by insane difficulty spikes as they painstakingly learn the ropes. But if you are willing to put in the work, there are few games out there that are willing to pay off your persistent learning with such an unforgettable experience. If I had to choose a single game in the Final Fantasy series to have someone play, a game that seems to contain everything that's made the series so important in my life and lives of so many other gamers, a game that seems to represent the classic charm and wonder of the old, as well as the progressive discovery of the new in one title, it would have to be Final Fantasy IX. Now, this isn't my favorite game in the series. I've played and beaten Final Fantasy VII more than I have IX. But when I boot up the game and am hit with the incredible opening overlooking a fantastic landscape accentuated by Nobuo Uematsu's masterful score, I can't help but be transported back to the first time I ever played it. There are so many things this game does right. There is absolutely no phoning it in when it comes to aesthetic design of Final Fantasy IX. Every character, whether a main one or some random NPC, is just a complete work of art. The details on some of these inconsequential individuals is honestly astounding. I mean, look at this thief, this hippo kid, this hot girl that's in the story for like 2 scenes, these rat people, random bird queen. The list goes on and on. Final Fantasy VIII's NPCs looked like palette swaps of the same 5 models. Final Fantasy VII's? Well, if something surpasses the character design of Final Fantasy IX, it's these settings. Nothing is generic looking in the least. A typical RPG ice cave becomes a crystal castle. Sweeping grassy fields house uniquely placed villages, and castle cities are filled to the brim with detail. None of this design would be worth your time if it didn't come with an engaging story to tie it all together. Final Fantasy IX's tale gives weight to the detailed world and its characters. Watching Vivi grow from a scared kid who gets bullied by a rat to a dependable mage whose convictions lead him to save the world is inspiring, to say the least. I feel that almost every single member of the main cast gets this kind of treatment in the story. With the exception of Quina and Amarant, Zidane, Garnet, Freya, Aiko, and Steiner all go through incredible transformations in the story. By the end, you're left with a cast that has changed, some physically, others emotionally, but all fundamentally. Final Fantasy VII and VIII had strayed heavily from the job system, and I applaud them for it. The customization of both games allowed you to create each character into whatever you wanted. Final Fantasy IX opted to return to the rigidly defined jobs of each character, and it's better for it. What I love is that each job fits the personality of each character so well that both story and battles seamlessly tie together in theme. Zidane is the dashing thief who's fast on his feet while still delivering precise and deadly blows. Steiner is the rigid knight who holds sword in both hands as he cleaves his enemies. Vivi is about as iconic a black mage as it comes, with his dark, hidden facial features, pointy hat, and devastating magic. You have 2 summoners to choose from. Garnet is your more traditional damage-centric summoner, while Aiko shakes things up with the summons more geared towards buffing the party. The list goes on with blue mages, monks, and dragoon knights, but I think you get the picture. Whenever I boot up the game, the first question in my mind is always, what will be my party's composition this time? Will I opt for the standard thief, black mage, white mage, knight combo? Will I switch Garnet out for Aiko and take advantage of her useful summons like Phoenix or Carbuncle? Perhaps I want to use Quina or Amarant as my healer this time so I can have more powerhouses on my lineup. Do I want the versatility of Freya or the devastating power of Steiner? The only real choice that's locked in is the requirement to use Zidane, though he's useful enough of a character that I doubt this will be too disappointing. Where I feel the customization of characters comes in is the choice of passive abilities. Each armor and weapon your character equips will grant a passive ability of some kind. After enough battles, you can permanently learn the ability even after unequipping the item. Having auto haste, auto life, or auto barrier feels incredibly satisfying. There are dozens of these abilities and each have their own use throughout the story. Detailed world building and design, emotionally weighty characters, and fast-paced, engaging combat, coupled with a decent amount of customizability, is paced nearly perfectly in its 40-hour runtime. All this culminates in a timeless experience with very few flaws overall. If it's not clear already, this is the definitive Final Fantasy, and if I wanted to introduce someone to the series, I'd have them start here, no questions asked. Final Fantasy is one of the longest running series in video game history and has continued to deliver unforgettable experiences to this day. Each game is added to its legacy, slowly creating the image of what makes a Final Fantasy. But from the years of 1997 to 2000, 4 games were released that defined the past, present, and future of this beloved series. Thanks for watching.